morning the sun was shining, I was laying in bed, wondering if she changed it all, if her hair was still red. Her folks, they said our lives together sure was gonna be rough. They never did like Mama's homemade dress, Papa's bank book wasn't big enough. And I was standing on the side of the road, rain falling on my shoes, heading out for the East Coast. Lord knows I paid some dues getting through, tangled up in blue.
Hello, my name is Cantor Dan Singer, and welcome to Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. We're grateful to the Jewish Broadcasting Service and to our supporters who made this program possible. Before we begin, I want to invite you into this experience. Boy from the North Country by Sam Sussman is a book that meets each reader in a different place. If you've ever lost someone who you love, walked a parent through illness, or still carry the voice of someone who shaped you, this book will speak to you. It's also a story for anyone who finds meaning in art, whether through the music of Bob Dylan, through the discipline of Stella Adler, or through the creative genius and beauty of the art of Marc Chagall. This book will speak to you. We all come to this book from a different place. For me, it connected to my own experience growing up in the North Country, in Duluth Superior, and to the North Country where all of our stories seem to strangely cross over. You will find your own connection. We framed this conversation around Passover and Rosh Hashanah, about Exodus and renewal, about endings and new beginnings. I encourage you, read Boy from the North Country and connect with Sam Sussman online. And then join us for this remarkable conversation with Sam Sussman, the author of Boy from the North Country.
Thank you all for being here this evening. It's really an honor to be able to welcome Sam Sussman to us this evening. Sam is one of the most exciting emerging voices in contemporary literature. He grew up in the Hudson Valley and went on to study at Swarthmore College, later earning a master's in philosophy at Oxford University, where he was deeply immersed in philosophy and literature. He lived and worked internationally in Berlin, Jerusalem, and beyond. He's teaching and writing, and he's been involved with PEN America and the global literacy community. Fix me if I've made any mistakes. His debut novel, Boy from the North Country, has already made a very remarkable impact. It was a finalist in the National Jewish Book Award, which they celebrated just last night at the gala. How was the gala?
Wonderful.
Good food?
Very good.
Okay, excellent.
Better conversation.
Even better conversation. That's what it should be like tonight. And we'll make it a different night, you know. So this has been widely praised. His book has been very widely praised as a powerful, immediate meditation on loss, identity, and what it means to be a son. Critics have called it one of the most moving mother-son stories in recent memory. At the heart of the book is Sam's mother, Fran Juno Sussman, that's her real name, a holistic healer, writer, and teacher whose voice and wisdom shape every page. Sam has said that literature itself is a kind of love language between them, and reading her work, including the writings preserved on her website, a memorial website that's still up and you can go check it out, you feel that immediately. Her belief in love as something expansive, lived, and shared. I came to this book in a very personal kind of way. I got it as a surprise gift on Rosh Hashanah, which is kind of a theme in the book, keeps returning. It was from an actress friend of mine who was actually a lead in the Broadway tour of Girl from the North Country, a musical that features Bob Dylan's music that's set in Duluth, Minnesota. Like Sam, I'm also, in a sense, a boy from the North Country, raised in Superior, across the bridge from Duluth, where my father spent many years researching Bob Dylan's family history and their roots in Superior. So, especially his Jewish roots. My father died of cancer in his 60s, at a moment when I was also in grad school. So I was studying opera at the University of Michigan, and I was finding my own path in music the same way you were finding yours in philosophy and writing. So that was very touching for me. Reading Sam's book didn't feel like discovering something new. It felt like recognizing something. Two different lives, but a shared landscape of memory, loss, music, and the search that follows it. And what Sam has created in this novel is something rare, a work that doesn't resolve those questions, but deepens them and invites all of us to ask those same questions and make our own search. I'm going to play a little recording for you, and I need this to do this. This is from July 3rd, 1999, in Duluth, Minnesota, the North Country. And it's a reggae take on Knockin' on Heaven's Door that he performed with another Jewish songwriter, Paul Simon.
Strange and awful day when the mother-child reunion only emotion way.
So the reason I selected that piece is because it seems at that point in their tour, they decided to make it into a mashup between Bob Dylan's Knockin' on Heaven's Door and Paul Simon's mother and child reunion. And I thought that there's something poetic about that, and that we could make that happen in our conversation here tonight. So we're here a week before Passover, a time for telling stories, asking questions, and making meaning out of memory. This book feels exactly like that kind of story. So let's begin the way we do at a Seder, by telling the story. So, for those of you who are just joining us tonight, can you tell the story of your book? There's a microphone right there. Oh, here, let me make sure that's on. Actually, I can just switch it out. There you go.
Well, thank you for having me, Cantor Dan, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was moved by how you've described in person before we began tonight, and in what you've said, and in what you've written to me leading up to tonight, how you felt that the novel spoke to you so personally. I think that's one of the great powers of literature. In the last volume of In Search of Lost Time, Proust writes that he will have written as many books as he has readers. That for each of us, we take a book and we make it our own, and we link our own experiences to the artwork itself, and that's the magic of reading and of writing. So it's a pleasure to have met you and to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I don't really believe in plot summaries, so I'm not going to give one. But I will say that this is a book about a young man who is in search of identity and a sense of self, and he goes looking for a father, and he finds his mother. It's a very simple version of the story. To tell you a bit more, it's about Evan, who's raised by his mother, June, in Goshen, upstate New York, biblical Goshen, and she raises him in this very unusual and idyllic landscape. They live in the woods, they have chickens and dogs, and what's valued in this world is creativity and time with one another and natural beauty. And as Evan grows up, one of the unsettling features of his life is that he doesn't know the identity of his biological father. And he tries to speak to June about this, and she never wants to talk about it. And then at a certain point, when Evan is a teenager, strangers start to tell him that he looks like this musician. They ask him if you ever heard of Bob Dylan. You look a bit like him. And Evan starts listening to the music, and he finds something sort of familiar in the way that Dylan articulates himself, and in the way that Dylan is also this Jewish kid from the North Country who wants a larger sense of self and who finds that in creative expression. And one day, Evan is in the car with his stepfather, and a Dylan song comes on, and his stepfather says, you know, there's a line in there about your mother. And to Evan, this is jarring because they don't know people like that. The idea that his mother would know Dylan is sort of completely outside the terms of their world. So he asks his mother about this, and first she says, no, I never knew him. And then slowly she says, okay, yes, I knew him.
Yeah, that's why I was going to switch it out after it was finished.
I wish I could fix it, but I don't.
Yeah, hopefully that one's better.
How's that? Great. So at first she says, no, I never knew him. And then she says, okay, yes, I did know him. And yes, we did have a romantic relationship, but that was long before you were born. And then she says, okay, well, we first met long before you were born. And she tells him when he's 15 that she was involved with Dylan the year before he was born. But she won't say any more than that. And that's where things are left. And Ed leaves home, he goes out into the world to try to become his own person in his own way. He wants to be a writer. And when he's in his mid-20s, that's when the novel opens. He's been living in London, and he receives a call from his mother, who is sick and who needs his help. So he comes home to be with her, and they start spending time together as adults in a way they never really have before. He's come home, you know how it is if you have adult children, or if you've ever been one. You come home for a few days here or there, but now for the first time they're spending week after week with each other. And really the heart of the book is about how they begin to understand one another in new ways, and how Evan comes to understand the choices that his mother made about what to tell him and how to talk about her past and the decisions that have shaped their lives. And about a third of the book is told from June's perspective as she's describing to Evan this earlier part of her life. And she's describing for the first time this relationship that she had with Dylan in mid-1970s Jewish bohemian New York. And she's describing her own early life as an actress and their relationship. And Evan feels that she's finally drawing him closer to his own origins, to Dylan. And of course, as the book goes on, I won't ruin anything, but what she's really doing is giving him a deeper understanding of who she is. And he's coming into a realizations about who is this woman who has made him who he is. So there's lots unsaid there, but that's the sort of rough shape of the novel.
It's incredibly powerful. I can guarantee you'll have to have boxes of tissues with you throughout throughout it. I know many of us share experiences and encounters with those who have suffered from cancer, and so we feel it in a very deep and powerful way. I mentioned before that this is going to be kind of like a Passover Seder, since it's the week before Passover, only I don't have any food to offer anyone. But, it is about asking questions. So I want to sing a little song that was written 2 days before Passover in 1961 by Bob Dylan. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she lands in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. I actually set this for Manishtana Halayla Hazeh. You can sing it for your seders, actually. But do you think that this book is more about questions than answers?
I think that this is a novel about trying to understand what the right questions are. So when Evan is a teenager, he feels that nothing in his life could be more important than answering the biological question of whether Dylan is his father. Right, that's the second chapter of the novel, and the journey is toward Evan understanding that there are more important questions in his life. The question of how he understands himself, how he understands his mother. When he's 15, he asks June point blank, "Is Dylan my father?" And she says, "Who is there for you? When you struggle, when you thrive, who is there to love you as you need to be loved?" Right? That's a more profound question than who is Evan's biological father. And so that's the starting point for the book. But I think, like any worthwhile story, any worthwhile work of art, the novel is trying to show us that what seems superficial or shiny, what seems important, is actually not what is most important. Mm-hmm. And this book came out in September, and I've had many people, especially many journalists, who say to me, "Well, but in the end, Evan doesn't get a definitive answer. Mm-hmm. But why didn't you write a definitive answer?" Mm-hmm. But the whole project of the book, in a way, is Evan coming to understand that that answer his mother gave him when he was 15 is sufficient, that she is sufficient, that their relationship is sufficient, and that the question about Dylan is not essential to his sense of self. So I think of the novel as asking us what's most important in life. And it turns out there are more important things in life than a biological connection to celebrity.
Yes, I noticed that in the novel, that you distinguish the difference between biological relationship and artistic relationship. That's something that reminds me of Bob Dylan's book called The Philosophy of Modern Song, where he draws upon many artists that have inspired him, and he has a song called "I Contain Multitudes," and I see that in your book in the way that you approach the artists. Can you speak more to the various artists that you've featured in there?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a wonderful question. So I wanted this to be a novel that brings together all of the artistic forms that I love. And so there's poetry and painting and theater and music all coming together in the book. And there are certain figures who are always in the background of the book. And I think I'll talk about a few of them. One is Norman Rabin, who is the youngest child of Sholem Aleichem. And Rabin was a painter. He had a studio not far from here on the 11th floor of Carnegie Hall. And he was sort of this old, grouchy painter, and he had a rule that anyone could walk into his studio. But he didn't care what your credentials were. He didn't care whether you'd gone to college. June, who studies with him in the novel, has dropped out of college. But what Rabin cares about is, the only credential is, can he yell at you until he transforms you into the artist you're capable of being? Or you realize there's another calling for you in life. And so June and Dylan first meet in Rabin's class. And Dylan, in the late 70s, credited Rabin with turning him out of this personal and artistic crisis he was going through and into Blood on the Tracks. And the novel in part tells the story of sort of Dylan coming out of that moment of crisis and into that album, and he's having this relationship with June at that moment, and she's studying with Stella Adler, and she's playing the role of Hedda Gabler, and so they're both in these sort of deep, intense artistic projects, and their relationship is so much about that meeting point. So that's a little about what's happening in that moment in the book, but maybe I'll talk about one artist who's in the background, who is Marc Chagall. So Chagall, to me, is such an extraordinary artist. I thought about him all the time I was writing the book, and there are descriptions of a few of his paintings in the book. Chagall, to me, is the most formative boy from the North Country. He grew up in a shtetl in Belarus. His parents were illiterate. By the time he was 20, he'd left this small town in Belarus, and he was living in Paris. And he was exhibiting his work with Picasso and Braque, and he was at the center of Parisian modernism, the School of Paris. But what does he paint at that moment? He paints the fiddler on the roof. He paints these scenes from Vitebsk, right? He's desperately wanted to escape this hometown, right? But then once he escapes, it becomes the subject, right? It becomes his artistic subject. He can only see his hometown, his origins, his parents. The fiddler on the roof, who, by the way, was his uncle, who on Shabbos evenings would get drunk and climb up onto a roof and play the fiddle, and everyone in the town hated it. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's what Chagall is painting, that he can only see Vitebsk through the lens of Paris. Right? And this novel is so much a story of leaving and returning. And Evan has felt claustrophobic in Goshen, small town in upstate New York. He's felt that he can't become himself, so he leaves, and he lives abroad, and when the novel opens, he's living in London, and he's trying to write, but he hasn't become the artist he wants to be. And now he comes home, right, in this moment when his mother needs him, and for the first time, he's seeing that everything that has made him who he is, it's not that he's lived in London and Berlin and Jerusalem. What's made him who he is, right, his sense of self, has come from this extraordinarily unique woman who's raised him in these highly unusual circumstances, in this house in the woods, right, away from everything that is not these few things in life that she values: creativity, natural beauty, the love between them. And he's realizing that's what he has to write about. He realizes, he writes at a certain point, he has to create a novel that's drawn from his mother's wisdom. That's so much the journey of the book. So Chagall is always in the background for me.
That's beautiful. It's amazing. My mother is actually a visual artist. So I felt the art, the classes, and the learning about Chagall was just very powerful to me. Marcel Proust, you raised him before, and Amos Oz was the other author that you described once as your Western Wall, which I thought was just a fabulous metaphor for your literary idols. What did they contribute to this book?
I think Proust and Oz are both writers who are deeply immersed in the question of how do you transform life into literature, right? And all of the characters in this novel are experiencing that. June, Evan's mother, when she talks about her life as a younger woman, she's describing how she had these painful experiences that she's trying to come to terms with by playing Hedda Gabler. And through that role on stage, she's understanding something about who she is and what are the experiences that have made her who she is. And Dylan, who's struggling through the agony of his divorce and his feeling in the novel, he's 33, he feels he hasn't written anything worthwhile since the first half of his 20s. And he's putting that anguish and frustration and sense of inadequacy into the songs that become Blood on the Tracks. And Evan is taking all of these confusing experiences of his life and he's transposing that into the novel that will maybe become Boy from the North Country. And of course, that's what I was doing in this work. And I think Proust and Oz are both novelists who understand that writing and language, they're acts of self-creation and affirmation. They live somewhere between truth, nonfiction, and fiction. They understand that that's what a novel is. Proust was once asked, why do you write so much about your life? And he said, I'm not writing about my life, I'm writing about my memory of my life, right? And Oz, whose great work is A Tale of Love and Darkness, he called that, he said it's a non-fiction novel. And so much of what fascinates me or what compelled me to write this book is that understanding that literature can be a way of understanding our own stories and deciding who we are, right? There's a moment when June and Evan are watching Fiddler on the Roof, and she pauses and she says, you can tell the story of Tevia's life in many ways. You can tell it as a story of loss and devastation and hopelessness, or you can tell it as a story of faith and resilience and community and strength, right? And Evan there are many ways that he can understand who he is, what his origins are, what he should value in his life, right? And he's deciding who he wants to be by writing this novel. And at the beginning, he says, when he first comes home, he's been trying to write a novel from his life all the years he's been away, and he says, I have never known how to tell my own story, not even to myself, right? But he's using literature to come to this deep sense of self-understanding. And that's what Proust is doing, and Oz is doing, and that's why they've been such great influences on me.
And I believe Oz wrote about his mother when he was in his 60s, looking back at his 12-year-old self. So that kind of retrospective vision of a lifelong conversation with his mother, do you feel like that
Yes.
is?
Yes, absolutely. I think we live in a culture that struggles to imagine the relationship between the living and the dead. Right? When you lose someone, the language is off and that person is gone. Right? But of course, that's not true. We carry within us everyone that we've ever loved. Right? And, Oz's A Tale of Love and Darkness stayed with me so deeply. I went back to that novel after my mother's death because he lost his mother when he was 12. And he's writing about her from the perspective of being a child, and from the perspective of being 12, and from the perspective of being her age at the end of her life, in her late 30s. And by the time he finishes that book, he could have been her father. He writes this. Because he's the age now where he could be her father at the time her life ended. So he uses literature to circle her and to understand her more deeply. And that's also a way, of course, of understanding himself. And this comes up in Proust as well, that Proust has this idea that our sense of self, our memory, is strewn through all the objects and experiences of our lives, right? And so if we want to understand who we are, right, we have to think back into our memories, right? We have to return to the places, the visual places that have made us. The opening of that novel is, of course, the famous scene where he drinks tea and he eats a madeleine, the French cookie, and he's taken back to these memories of his childhood, right? And I feel that so deeply. I live now in the apartment that's in this book, where my mom was living in the mid-70s, old rent-stabilized New York City apartment, right? So I was in that room taking her descriptions of living there at that period of time, right? And then trying to transpose them onto the landscape of that apartment and imagining her there. And then in the sections that involved Dylan, imagining them there together, right? And I think, yeah, that's so much what that experience of creation is, drawing on what you know and your memory and your imagination to tell a story.
Yeah, I feel that in that presence in this room, actually. When I pray, I imagine the past generations of people and clergy who have entered this same room, and all of the memories that they have brought with them and their family connections. And so it's something profound that I found about the book. And the ability to look at things from different perspectives and different angles in time, and to move back and forward through generations is one of the advantages probably of making it a book of fiction, that you can't necessarily accomplish it in the same way with nonfiction. Am I correct? Or?
Well, let me say about that, let me say a few things. So Norman Rabin, who is the painter, Shalom Aleikum's son, he has this idea about perspective that's in the book, right? He grew up in Russia. He left Russia when he was a child. He's born in 1901. And at a certain point, June is describing how Rabin has lived between centuries and between cultures and continents. And that's how he paints, right? From the vantage point of someone who has lived between these worlds. And that's what he's trying to capture in his perspective. And I think sometimes we think fiction is invention and nonfiction is sort of objective truth. But all the most interesting things in life and art are in between those two things. Perspective, memory, right? And so when I think about a novel, I don't think it's true or not true any more than a painting is true or not true. It's a way of conjuring experience. It's a way of portraying feeling.
I think that Bob Dylan was asked at one point what he thought of people's interpretations of what his songs mean. And he said, usually it's something in between what they think it is and what I thought it was. It was somewhere in the middle. So this sounds very familiar to me in terms of your writing and the way that Bob Dylan composes. Speaking of memory and looking back on places, I'm going to play a little something that is from Girl from the North Country. If you travel in the North Country fair, where the winds hit heavy on the borderline, remember me to the one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine. I think that kind of summarizes the return back to your childhood and the return back to that place when he speaks of the North Country. That is Goshen, which I think is fascinating that it's biblical. That is really ties into the Passover story directly. This is the story of Passover begins in Goshen, where the Jewish people really became a people in Mitzrayim. And so it's just powerful, the imagery also that you describe, a very pastoral kind of imagery in the opening scenes of the book that are so rich. Your use of words is really enviable. It's a gift. It's tremendous. So I want to have you do an English reading as a part of this Seder. We're on page 8 to 9 of your book.
Let me say something about Goshen and the North Country.
Sure.
That connects, I think, to this idea of using literature to come to some sense of self-understanding, right? And what I mean when I describe things that are between fiction and nonfiction, right? So my choice to make a metaphor out of Goshen, right? It's sort of both fiction and non-fiction. So I grew up in Goshen,
Yeah, it's a
right?
literal
That's the
place.
town that I'm from, right? But the choice to link that onto this story from Exodus of Goshen, the choice to understand and interpret the freedom that my mother felt in Goshen as akin to the flourishing and the freedom that the Hebrew people feel in Goshen, right? That's what I mean by a sort of act of literary creation, of self-understanding, right? There's a version of the story where I'm from Goshen, I happen to be from Goshen.
Yeah.
Okay, let's read.
Oh, okay.
Oh, do you have it?
You can read from yours. Yours is much better shape than
You have it marked,
Okay.
and I don't.
Here, go ahead. Don't pay attention to the side notes.
Okay, so this is from the end of the first chapter, and Evan has just come home, and his mother has made him this wonderful dinner, and they're sitting on the hill outside their house looking at the mountains. My mother looked at me with that same hesitant expression, and I felt once more the urgency of the plane gathering speed on the London runway, moments before cell service was lost to the clouds. I had reached for my phone then and texted her, "Love you more than anything. I will be with you every step of the way." Now I was with her, and I didn't know what to say. Dusk was falling over the hills. The mountain ridges had vanished into the night. The clay pans were nearly emptied, only the cauliflower stalks and squash skin uneaten. A coyote howled, and Lucy, our dog, barked in reply. My mother needed to rest before our early drive into the city tomorrow morning. "Thank you for such a lovely dinner, Mom. Why don't you rest, and I'll clean up?" "It's wonderful having you home, Evan," she said, looking directly into my eyes. "You might even say that time with you is my favorite part of being alive."
Well, I noticed that you open with a prayer. The book begins with a prayer that we sing every Shabbat about being thankful in the morning and the evening. Tov lehodot l'Adonai. The one that we sing goes, Tov lehodot l'Adonai. It's one of our melodies that everyone's going to sing along. But being grateful to God, I feel that being thankful is what it means to be a Jew. Yehudah means to be thankful in the morning and the evening. And I wonder if that structure that contributed to your decision to structure it as dawn and then day and then night.
Well, it's the Helium 92, and I'll just read it. This is the epigraph of the book, the beginning. "It is good to thank Adonai and to sing of your name, O Most High, to tell of your loving kindness in the morning and your faithfulness by night, with 10 strings, with the lyre, with a solemn sound upon the harp, for you have made me glad through your works, Adonai. I exult in the works of your hands." And for me, there's something there that's coming together about religiosity, artistic creation, and parent-child relations, right? I was at a Shabbat in the spring, about 4 springs ago. I was writing this novel, and it was a beautiful outdoor evening in Brooklyn, and I read this, and I just immediately knew, right, this is the epigraph. This is what I'm trying to do. I exult in the works of your hands. That's how I feel about my mother. I'm grateful for what she created, right? And now here I'm trying my best with 10 strings, with the lyre, with a solemn sound upon the harp, right? To give devotion, to give thanks to that, right? And I think that you were talking before about time and perspective and memory within Judaism, and I think this is something that Judaism understands very well. Now, Judaism means so many different things to many different people, but if you asked me what is it in the simplest possible way, it's a way of conveying moral wisdom from one generation to the next through stories. Right? That's what we're doing at all of our holidays. And that's what I wanted to try to attempt, right? To take my mother's wisdom and to put it into a story from her to me, one generation to the next.
Your mother also, you include a quote from her in the epigraph immediately after that prayer. Would you read that to them as well? And you probably don't need to read it, you just know it.
The line goes like this, it's, we are here to take the pieces of the universe we have been given, burnish them with love, and return them in better condition than we received them. And my mother said that all the time. It was sort of her mantra in life. And she was someone who had been through very difficult things in her life. And I never understood why she was saying that phrase. It just sounded like a slogan, right? And if you're a teenager, you don't like slogans, right? And even into my 20s, I didn't understand it. What was she saying? And then after she died, I Googled it. And the only thing that came up were links to her website. Right? And these were her words. She hadn't been quoting anyone. So after her death, I thought a lot about that line. We are here to take the pieces of the universe we've been given, burnish them with love, and return them in better shape than we received them. And I did not want this piece of the universe that I had been given. And I thought about what my mother did with the pieces of the universe that she did not want to be given. And much of the story that June tells Evan in this book is about hardships that she experienced in her life. And what my mother chose to do with difficult experiences was to transform them into ways of helping other people who had also been through the same thing. And I wanted to write this book and to aspire to that, to write a novel that would be candid about the pain of losing someone that you love, but in which the love would be larger than the loss. And ultimately it would be a redemptive story. So that quote of hers influenced me very, very deeply. I think about it every day.
The structure of that, the way that that you begin with Tov lehodot l'Adonai, which is really how we begin Kabbalat Shabbat. Every Shabbat evening, that is the psalm that announces Shabbat's arrival, followed by that quote, which is it's so Kabbalistic. It is the klipim and the broken universe that God underestimated God's capacity to create, and the world shattered, the universe shattered into pieces. So I feel like it's a combination of the psalm, and it feels very Kabbalistic and Kabbalat Shabbat in terms of its introduction to the book. So I felt a mystical sort of sense as I was entering your book. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
I don't know if it was intentional or if that informed the structure of it, because it feels like, dawn and the day and then a night. It feels like a passing of a Sabbath,
It's the structure of the human day and of a human life, right? And we're seeing the origin and the end of a life. That's so much what holds this book together, right? And I'm happy that you read it that way. I think there's also something, for my mother, there's something deep and powerful in the mystical tradition, in the Kabbalistic tradition.
Yeah.
And I thought often of the stories of Martin Buber. And there's actually one of my favorite scenes in the book is one night June and Evan smoke her medical marijuana and read poetry to each other. And she gives this long description of a Buber story and a particular Buber idea. And so all of those elements, there's also a deep theological element that runs through the book of where we find divinity, right? And June, like Buber, and in his own way, like the Baal Shem Tov, find divinity in all things,
Yes.
right? And there's, that's a thread that runs through their relationship and that she's trying to articulate.
It reminds me of the names that you feature in there. Can you speak to the names that, is there any deeper meaning to the names that you chose for these characters?
Well, my mother's middle name was Juna, and my middle name is Evan. And so this felt appropriate to have June and Evan. I think books are magical and transformative, but one thing that they don't allow us to do is put the entirety of someone between the covers. And I'm very sensitive to that, and I haven't written a complete or objective history of my mother's life, and I'm skeptical that such a thing would even be possible. So these characters are part of us. They're not all of us, right? And so the middle names felt right. The last name was difficult. What should I do with the last name? And I chose Klausner. Klausner was Amos Oz's birth name. And after Oz's mother died, he grew up in Jerusalem. After his mother died, he was 12, he went through this very transformative period. He left Jerusalem, he moved to a kibbutz. He sort of reinvented his sense of self. And Oz, of course, in Hebrew means courage. And he took that last name and he left behind Klausner. And I thought, one man's refuse is another's treasure. I'm going to pick that name off the ground and as a tribute to him, put it into the book.
Well, my read of it is connected to my dad's research in Superior, Wisconsin, that your name actually bears a great deal of similarity to Bob's family. Zusha is one of his Hebrew names, and Sussman is the name Sussman, which means sweet, a sweet man. And so that's one of his Hebrew names. And then the name Evan, your middle name, means stone. And like a rolling stone, the way I've always read like a rolling stone is because his mother's maiden name is Stone. And so when you read about a rolling stone, you imagine his family and their journey to this small town in the North Country. And so I see that as well. And your first name, Samuel, was actually the name of his great-grandfather, Samuel Solomovitz, who changed his name to Robert in the Superior phone book. So for me, reading through the lens of my father's research creates a whole nother level of meaning to what you've done in terms of just selecting the middle names. It seems like just a happenstance sort of thing, but for me it was very powerful just through my own lens. Let's go back to the hospital scenes where you're dealing with the what would you call like the DMV, basically. It's dealing with the bureaucracy of someone who won't even let your mother in because of a name mismatch on the, speaking of names. Speak to that kind of the sense of anger, because I felt that, and my mother felt that after my father's death. She created an art exhibit all about my father's death and the medical community and just how angry she was. So I would love to hear more about the anger that you were feeling there.
Well, not just anger, but also admiration. And that's important.
Yes.
That I learned a lot about grief in the period that I was in the hospital with my mother. And what I noticed among many of the nurses who worked in all of the hospitals that we were in is that people who are that close to suffering and illness and death, it tends to have one of two effects on people. Either people close up and become sort of a little cold and distant, and that is their understandable way of navigating the pain that's around them. Or people are transformed in this powerful way, and they live with this deep humanism of understanding that everyone around us is suffering. And it's no exaggeration to say that many of the nurses I encountered were really angelic. They had this deep sense of empathy and understanding. And I remember being, and of course, with the nurses or hospital staff, I was having very difficult conversations that Evan has in the book about, do you have a DNR order? Or at what point do you begin a morphine drip? And all of these sorts of questions. And I remember in the last days when I was really realizing, of course, I'm going to leave the hospital, but my mother is not. And you have these experiences in life that you realize you're within something that is going to transform you completely. And you have no choice of that transformation is happening, but you can choose how it will transform you. And I remember thinking about all the different ways that people had spoken to me in the hospital and realizing this will be part of my choice and my journey, that I can let grief make me softer and more empathetic, or more withdrawn and a little harder. And I think in the year since my mother died, I've had that conversation with many people who have gone through loss. And one of the reasons I wanted to write the book was to sit within those feelings myself and find what was redemptive in the end of my mother's life, right? And what was redemptive in her life and not only her death. I think all of those emotions, that atmosphere, was so poignant in the hospital.
Yeah. There's a scene where a rabbi walks in unannounced and tries to give you some spiritual guidance. Could you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I think it goes to the deepest Jewish themes. So a Chabad rabbi walks in when June and Evan are in June's last days, and he sort of barges into the room. He doesn't knock, and Evan is jarred that he would enter so private a space, but also he feels it as this moment. He says to the rabbi, she doesn't need you to make her a Jew. And he feels this, it'll be hard to summarize. It goes to some of the deeper theological questions in the novel, but he feels that June's Jewish identity is just as deep as this rabbi's, but it's less legible. That her aspects we were talking about before, her feeling of divinity in all things, her relationship to Kabbalah, and of course Evan's identity, which comes so deeply through Jewish literature, right? And he thinks to himself, he's polite enough not to say this to the rabbi, but he says, Judaism is a story and you stopped reading long ago. And part of what's being critiqued is the idea that Judaism embodies just a strict set of commands, and that if you do them every day, if you're an official Jew.
Right.
And part of what June is trying to get at, part of what she's inspired by in Buber, is this idea. Buber has a very radical idea that a prayer actually means nothing unless it's done with your whole heart, right?
Right.
And that's what June is telling Evan, that whatever you do in life, make it divine and do it with your whole heart, right? And that is a deep expression of her religiosity. And so those conflicts are sort of in tension when the rabbi comes into the room.
Yeah. You have this description in the hospital of seeing other people there, and your mind goes back to a scene from the Holocaust, and you talk about a photo. You mention Elie Wiesel, and one of the inmates there at the camp is saying that we all die alone.
It's a very powerful scene that you described there, and it's kind of inspired by seeing people in their most frail form. I was curious, because the researcher inside of me that I've inherited, are those names of the people in Chelmno real? Are those your real relatives, or are those fictionalized?
That's a very interesting question. So I think that there is for novelists of my generation who are now 3 generations removed from the Shoah, I think that there's a very interesting political, moral, artistic question. How do you write about the Shoah? Right? When it's not your experience, it's someone else's experience. There are all of these books and films now that claim to be about the Holocaust, but they're not, in my view, they're not really. They're sort of fairy tales that use the Holocaust as a setting, but they're not really drawn from people's experience, right? So I think one of the challenges is, how do you incorporate that history into your understanding of what it means to be live, but you can't claim it as your own, right? You can't write about it from your point of view. And the way that I tried to deal with that question in this novel is that the sort of echoes of loss, the echoes of the Holocaust, its legacy within this family emerge at these very unexpected moments, right? It's no historic parallel, right? But it's that Evan, I think many of us have this experience, Evan sees these emaciated people in the hospital, right? And he thinks of these photographs of the Shoah. That's how it lives within our lives in the 3rd generation, right? And so I tried to just sort of candidly write that into his experience, right? And that thread runs all through the book. And I'll say as well that Wiessel's books are called Dawn, Day, and Night.
There you go. And I recall that there was a photo that you saw that calmed you and brought you back to your childhood, the child of the doctor, Dr. Chen. So there's kind of what they call in rabbinical Judaism a nechemta, kind of a comfort that you very effectively took yourself back out of that scene and that really intense feeling. I want to, since the Israelites were wandering in the desert for 40 years, I want to talk about the lost years that you kind of had between the years that you were talking about in college and then at Oxford and then of ultimately coming to write this book. Could you speak more about your experiences that kind of shaped and formed you as, we said, how many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? So what were those roads that you traveled down in the 10 years that you spent?
You're asking me about the second novel.
Okay.
It's interesting. When you write from life, it's hard to edit because you have to realize at a certain point, am I writing this just because it happened? Is it really part of the essence of the story? So in an earlier draft of this book, there was much more about Evan's life between 18 and 26. And eventually I cut that out of the novel because I felt that all we needed to know for this story is that he's left home, he's lived many places, he's searched for his sense of self, and he's come home with that journey deeply incomplete. And he feels this sense of crisis, and that's going to be resolved in some way or transformed. Resolved is too complete an idea, but it's going to be transformed by what unfolds between him and his mother. So what can I say of my own experience? I will say that writing about being at Oxford was the most difficult part. Not emotionally, not personally, but intellectually was the most difficult part of writing this book because how do you describe the experience of being in college? It's so cliche. I left home and I read these amazing books and they transformed my view of the world, right? But what I'll say maybe about myself is just that, you know, I didn't really leave upstate New York until I was 19. And then when I left, I had this great thrill to meet people who were different than me, to expand my sense of the world. And that's really what those years in my life were about. And I was lucky to be able to study with remarkable people and learn and travel widely. And the whole time I thought, this is what makes me interesting and unique. And I was completely wrong about that. Because what could be more cliche than someone in their early 20s living abroad for a little bit, right? And when I came home when I was 26, I really realized what has given me my sense of self. I mean, certainly as a writer, what gave me the patience to sit at the desk day after day for years and years and eventually finalize this book, what gave me that strength and patience was the world that my mother created, right? Where, you know, we lived in the woods and literature was just the bloodstream all around us. And somehow I didn't know about the internet until I was like 12.
That's amazing.
And
what a great mother.
It's
amazing.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. And, you know, we didn't have
that
cable.
Doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, we didn't have cable TV. I mean, we really lived in this analog world, and this world in which, right, I mean, we were just spending time with our chickens or in the woods or with each other, and that was the experience that made me who I am. And it's a very strange thing to be a novelist in this contemporary world, right, where everyone every day is posting a story online, right? I mean, we live in a very instant world, and I think to be a novelist is to have a certain faith that the deepest things in life are worth turning off your internet and phone and thinking very deeply about and trying to put into a story. And that's the faith and that's the practice, and I'm grateful for that world that I grew up in, because I don't think I'd be able to do it otherwise.
I think Bob Dylan said about exactly the same thing, that had he not grown up in Hibbing, where basically the best activity was just watching the snowfall, you know, that so much of his time was just staring out into the snow, you know, and that his life wouldn't have turned out the way it was. And so I feel like you come out of Goshen with a great sense of gratitude for your childhood and for your mother, your upbringing. I related to, I think you mentioned once that she would drop a book down for you every morning for you to read. And that impact, I mean, I felt the same way as the son of a librarian. You know, I was ensconced in books, and many of them I went over my head. But I clearly I took to music much more. But the, you know, your time, those 10 years, I think you lived in Europe, you lived in Israel and Jerusalem. I would love to hear more about your relationship with Israel. There's a song called Neighborhood Bully. You know that song?
Of course.
Neighborhood Bully just lives to survive. You know that song? It's a Bob Dylan song. It's the ultimate Zionist anthem. I saw a video of you at Oxford that blew my mind. I was just the most incredible debate, and I think you nailed it. You just annihilated that issue in an incredible way. And so I want to see, like, what was it like to live in Jerusalem and in Europe? You know, did that you know, the Holocaust of Europe and in Germany, living in Germany, and then in Israel, did that kind of shape some of the imagery that you had there?
It shaped the imagery and the ideas. I think every place that we live, we're someone slightly different. The landscape brings something slightly different out of us, right? And certainly the artists, the literature that I was experiencing, the culture in all of those places were transformative for me. And as a person, as a Jew, as a writer, as all of those things. And I think when you've lived in many places in life, you realize how little you can assume about the way things are, right? How little you can take for granted. It gives you a sort of patience and curiosity about how other people construct their lives, pursue meaning, right? Live out what's important to them. And I think as a novelist, that is really a great gift, right? When I meet someone new, I try to assume almost nothing about what it is that gives their life purpose, right? And then that's the real freedom of being able to know someone, right? And I think when you write, you have to be able to inhabit someone else's perspective entirely, right? Even if it's your mother, right? That in a way is the hardest because of the intimacy, right? You think it's easy. Oh, I know my mother's perspective. I know her stories. But when someone tells you stories from their life, they don't give you every novelistic detail. You still have to inhabit that. You have to be a method actor, like in Stella Adler's studio.
I was just
right?
going to actually have you read that section.
We can do that, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay. It's page 88.
You have it marked, I don't.
Here you are, sir. This is from the Days section.
How many people know Stella Adler?
I do.
Okay, yeah, great. I thought so. Okay. One morning, while waitressing in the diner, I heard two girls my age talking about how anyone could walk into Stella Adler's studio. I was taken aback. My mother had been talking about the Adlers since I was a child. They were the most celebrated family of the New York Yiddish theater. Stella's father came from Russia in the late 19th century and did as much as anyone to establish Yiddish theater in New York. He was known for starring in Shakespeare plays adapted to the Russian shtetl. He once played a Yiddish King Lear. Stella was practically born on stage. She grew up to become the first Adler to make it from the Yiddish theater to Broadway. Then she went to Hollywood and changed her name to Ardler. She was 6 feet tall, blonde, and could easily be mistaken for Ingrid Bergman. Stella was everything my mother wanted to be, the child of Jews who fled decaying European empires and became someone in America. My mother loved telling me how she snuck into the theater as a teenager to see Stella in He Who Gets Slapped. Just to clarify, this is June talking about her mother. It seemed inconceivable that anyone could walk into Stella's studio. She was the most influential acting teacher in the country. You're probably familiar with method acting, the idea that rather than drawing from her own life, an actress should abandon her experience and imagine her way into the character. Marlon Brando made it famous. Later there was Warren Beatty, Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel. Every one of those actors had learned method acting from Stella Adler. I didn't understand why Stella would waste a moment on someone like me, but I had nothing to lose. I didn't want to write anymore, but I was thrilled by the idea of transforming myself into someone else, the promise of no longer having to be myself. I walked into Stella's studio because it was a portal into a different life, and every other door seemed closed. And I'll say that June emerges from her experience of acting and her experience of studying with Stella a completely different person. And so much of her story is about how, by playing the role of Hedda Gabler, and specifically, she transforms her sense of self and what's important to her. And I think that is a deep faith of the novel, that art is a way of achieving self-understanding.
The scene where she is rehearsing for her role and she's frustrated and Bob Dylan is there, picks up the script and they start rehearsing it together. That's right. That's just wild.
Well, there's a moment where June realizes that he's acting out all of the characters in his song, right? That the idea of folk music is that these ballads are passed down, right? And that as a singer, you pick up a ballad, you sing the song, you inhabit the character. You become the person in that song, right? And Dylan in the novel is always writing, making music in June's apartment, and she watches him shift between different modes, become this character and then that character. That's what he's doing with his music. There's a moment where she watches him play a song and she's thinking about these ideas, and she says, Bob Dylan himself is a work of fiction. Nobody by that name was ever born. He's used his music and his writing to achieve his sense of self, right? To articulate the thing that is most truthful about who he is.
Another thing that struck me about the Adler families, my dad is actually related by his first cousin married into the Adler family, Stella Adler's daughter, Ellen Adler. And just the amount of connections that this brings to my mind. There's actually a cool story from Louis Kemp, Bob Dylan's best friend from Duluth. In his book, he talks about a Passover Seder where he secretly orchestrates both Bob Dylan and Marlon Brando, thank you, Marlon Brando to show up at the Seder together, which is just the amount of connections that this brought to me was really, really incredible.
Let's talk about one other element, by the way, while we're talking about these Jewish artistic themes. You had mentioned that a friend gave you the book on Rosh Hashanah, which has a significance in this, in the novel. So Dylan went into the studio to record Blood on the Tracks on Rosh Hashanah. And he explains this to June. He explained it to my mother at the time by saying, the world is made anew on Rosh Hashanah. It's not just the celebration of one new year, right? On Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the creation of the world. And for him, he was 33, he felt that he hadn't made good music in years and years. At this point in the book, we've followed him as he's turned himself out of this artistic crisis, studying with Norman Rabin, and he's ready to record this music, right? And he chooses this significant date. He's going to go in on Rosh Hashanah. And I think all of the figures in this book, they have a deep sense of the metaphoric and literary depth of Judaism, right? Norman Rabin, the painting instructor, he was notoriously tough. If he didn't like something a student was doing, he would just throw the canvas onto the floor. And there's one moment in the book where he thinks a young painter is really not doing their best work, and he knocks her canvas over and he tells her, if there's any hope for you as an artist, you have to start at the absolute beginning. And he gives her a Torah and he says, sit on the floor and just start reading, right? And he really felt this, right? That she could become a better painter by reading Torah, right? And Dylan felt there was a significance in recording Blood on Rosh Hashanah. And for me, this novel came out 8 years to the day of my mother's death. And there was a deep significance for me in that. So these ways of making meaning are deeply rooted in Judaism, in literature. They're how we make sense of our lives.
Absolutely. I think he went back to Minnesota to record Blood on the Tracks, if I'm not mistaken.
He did,
yeah. Using Minnesota musicians. So it's kind of a return back to his former place.
There's a story, which is a controversial decision for him, and there's a story in there about him explaining why he did that. I won't say it, but for
Yeah.
those who want to read it, it's in there.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to read one last piece from the night section. I'll find the page for you.
I have that one. It's two.
Oh, that one you've got. Yeah,
Yeah.
you go for it.
So this is on those themes of memory and identity and storytelling. It comes toward the end of the book when Evan is realizing that he's going to leave the hospital, but June is not. And he's thinking about how he's going to carry this forward in his life. There would be no alternative to memory and to story. The only way to live would be to tell. For it was only through recollection that I would be able to recreate the intimacy I felt now in these fleeting hours, when I could still press my hand to my mother's gaunt cheek or place my fingers in hers and feel myself involuntarily absorbed by the rush of memory conjured by the touch of my skin against hers. For no matter how long I lived, or the distance I roamed from my origins, or the person I became, what could ever compare to the touch of my mother's skin, my first and most enduring impression of this world, the body from which I was born and, like a memory, like a story, passed on imperfectly into the world.
Looking past the end of the book, do you sense her presence and her? Do you imagine what she would be kvelling over right now at your accomplishments? Do you hear her voice? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I hear her voice all the time, and I wonder what she would think about particular things. And she's still an enormous source of guidance. And I think that's a deep irony about losing someone you love, that in a way you have to think more deeply about what they would think, right? You have to ask yourself more deeply. They're not here anymore to tell you, so you have to study their life even more deeply to try to understand what they would say and think and respond. And yeah, I hear her voice all the time.
Yeah, well, I know she's shepping nachas, as they say.
Thank
very
you.
Proud of your accomplishments. You're building a ladder to the stars, as they say. And with that, may God bless and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. May you stay forever young. Forever young, forever young. May you stay forever young. The original lyrics in Hebrew. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Yair Adonai v'navelecha v'chunecha Yisa Adonai v'navelecha v'yaseh lecha Shalom. That's the priestly benediction. Shalom, shalom, v'yaseh lecha shalom, forever young, forever young, forever young. May you stay forever young. That was a blessing that he wrote for his son. And it makes reference to Jacob and the ladder being built to the stars. And you're climbing that rung, and we're also proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so, with that, like every Seder, we look forward. L'shana haba Yerushalayim, we end with those words. But for you, we look forward to the next novel. When is that one coming out?
I'm still on book tour, so.
Okay. Second novel, we'll have to be patient.
But if you want to know when the second
Yes.
novel, you can sign up for my newsletter, follow me on Instagram. That's the best. Then that way you will know when I know.
That's right. Can we pass this around?
I can't give you the answer now. I don't know, but it's the thing about any book is that it arrives when it arrives, and you can't insist on it. You can't conjure it from your desire for it to exist, and it just takes hours and hours and days at the writing desk, and I'd be a fool to promise it.
Well, it's like the mother of muses that Bob talks about, the mother of muses that has to visit you, and that source of inspiration. So we hope that the mother of muses and your mother continues to visit you in your memory and in your writing, and so may you be blessed as you go on your way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now I'm going back again. I got to get to her somehow. All the people we used to know, they're an illusion to me now. Some are mathematicians, some are carpenters' wives. Don't know how it all got started. I don't know what they're doing with their lives.